Hey everybody, this is going to be a slightly different kind of video, more of an educational and informative and advice giving video. I received a comment on another video from YouTuber T-Town Trekker 5174 asking, so on the surface, a fairly simple question. Where do you start? What if you're interested in starting to collect Stephen King? Where do you start? A fairly simple question, seemingly simple question on the surface, but incredibly complex in practice. And so in this video, I'm going to give some tips, some tricks, some advice. I'm gonna flip over to my computer and show you some resources in terms of places you can go to actually look for books to buy, social media groups that you can follow for late breaking news, and also places to buy and sell books. And also we'll look at several publishers who are currently in the process of publishing Stephen King or have published in the past and may publish Stephen King again in the future. And we'll also bring Joe Hill into the mix. That's Stephen King's son. A lot of people who collect Stephen King also collect Joe Hill, myself included. So that's what this video is all about. It is in no way, I'm not going to say like this video is definitive. It's all you will ever need to know about collecting Stephen King, because the more you learn, the more you realize there is to know. Every answer brings additional questions, but this is intended for somebody who has been a fan of Stephen King either for a little while or for a long while, and is interested in more earnestly collecting Stephen King. And I'll try to talk about all the myriad aspects of that, but it's really intended for people who want to get started and just don't know where to start. So without further ado, let's get into it. So right out of the gate, I want to start with sort of a philosophical statement, and that is that you should collect whatever makes you happy. And whatever you collect, if you collect it because it makes you happy, you should enjoy it and appreciate it for the joy that it brings you. One of the things, could be a potentially negative aspect of collecting, is just this sense that I'm never done. It's never enough. There's always more. And I've seen some videos and seen some folks over the years that have just maybe like the world's most comprehensive Stephen King collection in a private collection other than Stephen King. I would hope that the man himself has the most comprehensive collection, but who knows? But private collectors, even the ones with the most amazing comprehensive collections, still don't have everything. And you go down these rabbit holes. So, at its most basic, most simple, Stephen King since 1974 has published around 80 books, give or take, depending on how you consider different releases in the main list. So he's released about 80 books. That's not an insignificant amount of books. That's a lot of books. So even if you just had one copy of every Stephen King book, whatever copy, whatever state or edition or whatever, one copy of every book is still a lot of books. But multiple books have had limited edition releases. Every book has an advanced reader copy that is released along with it. Some books have proofs. The signed limited editions can have advanced reader copies and proofs. The collections of stories, every story, most stories, not every story had been previously published from every collection, but most of the stories in the collections had first appearances. And my friend and collaborator Noah has talked about first appearances quite a bit. But so, you know, I might buy a copy of Everything's Eventual, the collection, put it on my shelf and think, okay, I've got the US, you know, maybe I pursue getting the UK copy. I get the US and the UK and I think, okay, I'm good, I'm done. And then I find out, well, there were advanced reader copies of Everything's Eventual. The US and the UK both had advanced reader copies. Well, man, maybe I should get those. And then I get those and I think, okay, I'm good. And then I find out, oh, but most of these stories in this book were first published in other things, magazines and online and digital files and all this random stuff. And as Noah has shown, pointed out, some of the magazines are very common and easy to find, and some, like Main magazine, are almost literally impossible. So one bit of advice is to enjoy the ride, try not to obsess, have fun, because even the most seasoned and experienced collectors don't have everything. If you're watching this video, there's a good chance that you too will never have everything. Please enjoy what you have. I also want to address this idea. It's a rather snobbish idea. I will just be honest. It's kind of a snobby idea that not everything is collectible. That there are collectible books and there are everything else, like reader copies. You know, it's good to actually read the story, but if you want to collect, if you're going to collect, then you should collect a very specific collectible type of thing. I don't agree with that. And it goes back to my first statement about collect what makes you happy and be happy with what you collect. So I collect, I look for hardcovers, first editions if I can. I also, every time I go to the bookstore, I look for the Signet paperbacks, the classic Signet paperbacks. And the snobby element would say, paperbacks are trash, they are garbage, at reader copies at best, they are not collectible. But my collection is what makes me happy. And those Signet paperbacks are the things I am most familiar with from my own childhood. They're the things that I remember, they're the things that make me nostalgic. So I collect them. I look out for them, and like, here's an example right here on the shelf. Early Signet paperback of Salem's Lot. So here's another bit of advice. So even if a book is not limited, even if some would say a book is not collectible because it had, you know, a million bajillion copies printed, there comes a certain point when even the most common book, when it was new, becomes very challenging to find in nice shape. So this paperback, potentially, well, the spine has a couple of cracks in it. So this was read, it was carefully read, and it was taken care of. And this book is like 50 years old. And for a book that's that old and this potentially fragile, I would consider it to be in great shape. So even though some would say it's not collectible and it's not valuable, I would challenge anybody, any day of the week, to find a vintage paperback from this era that's in this nice of shape. So I guess my bigger point is, don't worry about what other people find to be collectible. Worry about what makes you happy and collect what makes you happy. Even if other people don't feel like it's worth your time, effort, or money. Another thing I found is that when it comes to these things that are not collectible or have no value, when it comes to Stephen King, most things have value. I have found I've paid $10 at the bookstore for book club editions of Stephen King titles that are in really nice shape, and I've been able to sell them for 60, 70, 80 bucks because there is value there. So like some people, I think their idea of collectible has a dollar sign attached to it, and if it doesn't sell, it doesn't have a list price of over $100 and then sell 10 years later for $1,000, then it's not even worth investing in. But like I said, even the most common book, when it reaches a certain point in age, becomes hard to find in really nice shape. And when it comes to Stephen King, there is value in pretty much everything, except for, books that are completely torn up, whatever, what have you. So the bigger picture theme of this whole segment is collect what makes you happy. The next thing I want to talk about is a focus, a collective focus, or what are your goals when it comes to starting out? What do you want to do? What do you hope to achieve? It does help, I think, especially for beginners, to have a focus. And your focus and your goals may change over time. You might go down one avenue of collecting every X, Y, or Z thing that you find. And then you reach that point where you're like, holy crap, I've gotten them all. Maybe it's first editions. I want to have a first edition of every Stephen King book. And then you reach that point, you're like, hey, that's really great. And then a few years down the road, you might go, you know what? My focus is changing, my goals are changing, and you sell off some of your first editions to help fund your new focus and your new goal. And that's fine. But I think it is helpful to have a focus in mind. And for me, when I was first starting out, I didn't know, I knew what a first edition was. I didn't know how to identify it. It didn't resonate with me why that was such a big deal. So my first goal was to simply have a copy of every Stephen King book. So I had a mishmash of hardcovers and paperbacks and first editions and later editions and original covers and later covers and whatever. I wanted to have a copy of every book. And then I achieved that goal, and I felt really good. And then eventually I realized, I like the original artwork. And so then my focus, my goal became getting a copy of every book with the original artwork. So I didn't want, just my 1990s era Carrie paperback in my main collection. I really wanted to have a copy of Carrie with that original artwork with the beautiful girl's face that has nothing to do with Carrie White, but it's the original. That's what I wanted in my collection. And then over time, I learned about first editions. And so slowly, little by little, I started going through my collection, looking at what I actually had, and moving along, either selling or donating the things that weren't first editions in the pursuit of trying to obtain first editions of every Stephen King book. So I started with the first editions, and I was really thinking about the US editions because that's what was on my mind. And then I started realizing, well, hey, there's books, Stephen King books in multiple languages, multiple countries, and the UK ones are, they're in English. So that's useful. I always feel kind of sheepish or weird buying a book that's in a language that I don't speak. And as of right now, the only language I really speak is English. So then I branched out and started collecting some of the UK first editions as well. So where to start? Have a focus. And the farther down this rabbit hole you go, the more you realize how much there really is out there. So like I was talking about, there's 80 books. You want a copy of every book? That's a great first goal. Do you want a first edition copy of every book? That's another great goal. Do you have a particular favorite book that you want as many different copies of that book as you possibly can? That's another really interesting goal. There's a guy who travels around and he has a like cherry fully restored Plymouth Fury that looks exactly like Christine. And so he travels around to car shows and he shows this car off. But what's even more interesting and I think more quirky and unique is he travels with a locking display case, and inside the case he has purchased, if not every single edition of Christine published in every language in every country in the whole world since the original publication of that book. If he doesn't have every single one, he's at least very close to it. And it had never occurred to me that someone could do a deep dive on one book, like their very favorite one. But I think that's really interesting. So, you know, Stephen King has around 80 books, and some of them you probably love. Some of them, you know, maybe you're ambivalent about. Some of them maybe you really don't like. And you're thinking to yourself, well, you know, am I a completionist? Do I want to spend any of my hard-earned money on a book that I didn't really enjoy just to say that I have it in my collection? I'm sort of in that boat. I mean, I certainly haven't spent a lot of money on books that I didn't really care for, but, you know, well, got a hole in my collection, and this is one of my least favorite ones, but I should have a copy of it in the collection so I can say it's there. You know, I get that, but on the other hand, that is kind of ridiculous, and it makes no sense. If your favorite book is Christine or Pet Sematary, and you get the first US, UK, the limited editions, and then you start looking at, well, gosh, maybe there was an edition published in French. There's been several of those, maybe Russian or Spanish or German. And then you just start to deep dive and you don't have a very broad collection. You have like a super deep collection on just like one title. Maybe that's your goal, and that's perfectly okay. Do you want to focus on the limited editions or signed editions? So there are signed limited editions and there are signed editions, and some people collect the signed limited editions, and some people collect the first edition copies of books that have Stephen King's signature in them. Some people prefer to just have his name written in it, Stephen King, and some people really prefer if there's an inscription. So something like, in a copy of Cujo, for Mark, hey, thanks so much, don't let the dogs bite, Stephen King, and then a date. He's written more than just his name, and to some people that is amazing. That is very desirable, to have as much writing in a book from Stephen King's own hand as possible. So some people collect those. Some people collect the advanced reader copies. Some people collect proofs. Some people collect multiple copies of the exact same edition of the book, even though my resources like finances and shelf space, I've never been able to practically follow that route, and I'm glad, because if you have 50 copies of your very favorite book and they're all the same and they're all lined up like soldiers on the shelf, I don't quite understand that. But like I said, whatever makes you happy. And if that's what makes you happy, if you want to have your bookshelf just filled with identical copies of The Eyes of the Dragon, you just want to have this wall of green because that's your very favorite Stephen King book, more power to you. The next thing I want to talk about is how the idea of rarity is kind of relative. And if you'll indulge me, I would like to start by telling a story that sort of illustrates this point. So years ago, I lived in Arkansas, and every year there would be theme weekends throughout the year, and one of the theme weekends in this town was Volkswagen Weekend. And I loved Volkswagen Weekend because what I saw was the love and the care and the work and the sweat and everything that went into these generally older cars and vehicles getting restored, maintained, keeping them running. They all ran, of course, because they all made it to the festival, but they weren't all in amazing shape. But I can tell, like, somebody, this is a labor of love for this person. They got out there, they found this vehicle, they used their two hands to work on it, to bring it back to life. They're invested in it. Well, in the same town every year, they would also have a Corvette weekend. And sometimes you would see vintage, old school Corvettes that maybe the owner had maintained and regularly worked on. But what I saw a lot on Corvette weekend were people who seemingly, they just bought a brand new Corvette because they had the means, and then they drove it to the festival and they would sit next to it and say, "Yep, Corvette weekend. I'm a Corvette owner. This is the thing." It didn't come across in the same way. There wasn't the sense of personal, like, passion and investment and blood, sweat, and tears that went into that. It was just, you went to a car lot and you bought an expensive car and you drove it here, and now you're sitting next to it so people can see you with this expensive car. And what I'm trying to say is that even the rarest Stephen King books that are out there can almost always be had for a price. So it's really easy when you look at these amazing collections of people who've been collecting for a long time and they've got a lot of big ticket, high dollar stuff to think, man, that's an amazing collection. And sometimes, like in the case of Noah, my collaborator on this channel, he was there when the book was brand new. He went and he paid the $50 or $60 for a book at the time, and he's more like the Volkswagen owner, right? So he did the legwork, he found the thing, he got it, he's maintained it, he's preserved it, he has taken care of it all this time. And a book that cost maybe $50 35 years ago maybe now costs hundreds of dollars, but I feel like he's done the work to maintain that. And then there's other people who decide one day, hey, I'd like to collect Stephen King, and they have tremendous amount of resources and they can just throw money at anything that comes along, and before you know it, they've got an amazing collection. And it can make people who are of more limited means, who are starting out sort of piecing things together, it can be very discouraging. But I just, I don't want to sound angry or jaded or bitter, but the point is, you put it in context and put it in perspective, anything can be had for a price. And again, it all comes back to my main point, whatever makes you happy. So, like, don't look at somebody else's shelfie of their collection and think, oh man, that's some amazing stuff. Well, maybe that person was a millionaire and they just spent money and bought some books. And maybe the most valuable thing in your collection isn't, like, in the big picture, isn't that valuable at all. But maybe you did the work, you went to bookstores, you hunted in the wild, week after week, month after month, year after year. And then one day, there it was, just a brilliant, fine condition, first edition of Cujo. And you love the book, and you found it, and you brought it home, and it's the crown jewel in your collection. And it's worth like $150. But to me, you put in the legwork, you did the work, you found the thing, and it's a culmination. And I think when I see shelfies like that, and people almost always apologize, oh, I don't have the same caliber of collection as other people. But the blood, sweat, and tears, the legwork, the time, the effort that went into finding that and building that collection makes it way more special, in my perspective, than the $1 million collection of somebody who literally had $1 million and spent it all over the course of like 6 months to build this collection. It's like, okay, that's great. You have a lot of money. You bought some books. That's cool. So again, it's all context. It's all relative. It's all subjective. That's my perspective on it. That's my opinion on it. I would consider online shopping, and I'm going to show you some resources that I use I would count that as sort of in the wild. Sometimes you have to be in the right place at the right time, and whether you drive to a bookstore and you browse their stock in hand, or you run searches on a regular basis on eBay looking for just that particular book at that particular price point that you've been looking for ages, and you find it, I think that's wonderful, and that's very exciting. It's another thing, it can be harder to find a really, really nice copy of a first edition from like 35, 40 years ago that's in like really good shape for a good price. That can be much harder to find either in person or online or whatever than like if I had the money and I wanted to spend it on the signed limited edition of Firestarter from Fantasia Press from over 40 years ago. It probably wouldn't be that hard. I know a few people I could reach out to. I could go on the Facebook groups that I follow, and I could say, hey, I have $3,500 and I want a copy of this book, and I would probably end up with a copy of that book. But if I said, I have $250 and I am looking for an absolutely pristine, fine condition copy of the first trade edition of Firestarter, that would be much harder to do. Even though it's a much more common book, the much more common books were not commonly as well kept and taken care of as the collectible copies. So again, it's all relative. It's all how you look at it. Tying along with having a focus is another very important point, and that is patience. So, the temptation is there, especially if your goal is to have just a copy of every Stephen King book. And, you need about 25 or 30 of them to fill out your collection. Most of them are very common. And you know that any day of the week, like, I could go online and for 20, 25 bucks, I could get really nice copies of like 20 of these books. And for $500, I could just knock out this huge swath of what I need in my collection. You could save that $500 and hold it in reserve for one book or maybe two books that are harder to find and much more valuable. So what I think ends up happening a lot of times is that people sort of nickel and dime themselves. They don't have infinite resources. And we all like instant gratification, right? So go to the store, the bookstore, eBay, whatever, and you think, man, this is great. For, a couple $100, I could get 10, 12, 15, maybe even 20 books. And that's a great deal. But any day of the week, I could get that exact same deal. What is harder to do is to hold that $200 or whatever in reserve and keep running your searches and be patient for that one thing that you've really, really been looking forward to, that you've been hunting for and trying to find, but rarely comes up. If you save your money, then that thing comes up. It's a much harder to find, a much rarer deal, but you're ready to go rather than having spent all your resources on much more common things. Along with that, when it comes to patience, you know, it's important to set parameters and have an idea of what your boundaries are. So if you think to yourself, I really, really, really want a nice quality first edition of Pet Cemetery, and I mean, I want it to be really nice, and I don't want to spend more than $100 on it. That is doable. That's a reasonable goal. And you look for it, and you look and you look, and just nothing is quite coming up. All the ones you find, they have issues. You know, you don't mind having some issues, but you want it to be pretty darn nice. And the things that you're seeing have chips and tears and creases and folds and just damage, or something's written inside of them or whatever. And then one day a pretty nice quality copy comes along, and you've told yourself, my budget for this is really $100, maybe 120, 125, and this really nice quality copy comes up and it's $175. And you think, man, I mean, it's kind of a stretch. It's more than I wanted to pay. I don't know. And you know, you have to decide, do I jump on it? Do I spend more than I thought I wanted to? Or do I hold out? Am I patient? By the same token, maybe you think, I want a pretty nice copy of this book, and I don't want to spend more than $100 on it. And you see all the copies that you're seeing that are $100 or less are pretty gnarly. They're overpriced at that level, and they're just not floating your boat. And then over time you start to think, I'm never going to find one. I guess it's just unreasonable to hope to find a copy of this book for this price. And so one comes along, and it's really not what you envisioned, like as far as quality goes, but you know, it is under the budget, and you think, well, it'll be good. You know, I'll get it and I'll have it. And I think a trap that a lot of people fall into, myself included, is this idea of a placeholder where, man, this book, I just never find it. And even though this copy is really beat up and kind of a hunk of junk, I'll have it as my placeholder. So what I've done is, rather than spend $150 and hold out for the nice copy I really want, maybe I've spent $50 or $60 on a copy that is far less than the standard I had set for myself. So on the bright side, you have a copy of the book on your shelf. Okay, that's great. You know, but long term, is that going to bring you satisfaction? Or is this something that you're going to keep hunting, and you're going to keep looking for something better? So bright side, you have a copy on your shelf. Downside, you just dropped like $50 or $60 on something that you know you aren't going to want to keep long term. So patience is key. And every time I have set myself a goal, a realistic like price range for a certain condition of a certain title, I've always found it. And I've fallen victim. I've done the placeholder thing. There are books that I am almost like, even though I have nice copies, I guess it's just habit baked in, I constantly am looking for shinier, better copies. And I think, you know, part of it's because I love the hunt. I love the thrill of the hunt and searching for books and finding things. But another part of it is that my goal was to have first editions of as many of the books as I possibly could. And I sort of met that goal. You know, I'm not 100% there, but I'm pretty close. And rather than just save my resources and keep looking for those more big ticket items that I lack, hey, look, here's another first edition copy of Needful Things in great shape for $40. So I'll go ahead and pick that up. And do I need it? No, but there it is. So patience and focus are key. Okay, I think I'm going to get off my soapbox now. This is turning into a quite lengthy video, but it's a big topic, a seemingly simple question that is actually a very large topic. So I'm gonna go to my computer, I'm gonna share my screen, and I want to show you some online shopping resources, some social media things that I follow that I highly recommend you follow. And also, we'll take a look at some publishers and how you can sign up for their newsletters so that you can stay in the loop of what is coming. And okay, so away we go.
So in regards to the question, where do I get started? I wanted to take the opportunity to show some valuable online resources that I have used in my own collecting journey and which I continue to use even now. So I'm going to share my screen. I've got a lot of windows open here. Okay, so let's start with Facebook. There are a number of Stephen King related Facebook groups. And these are a couple that I follow, that I recommend, that I participate in, that are really good for collectors. So this first one is called Stephen King Rare Books Collectors, Buyers, Sellers. And this is a great resource. Not only you can share pictures of things and ask, what do I have? What is this? You can go on this and say, I am searching for this particular type of thing. It is generally limited to the signed limited editions or the first edition books up to about Misery ish 1987. After that, Stephen King's print runs just ballooned, and the books were not nearly as rare as they were from 1987 and earlier. So here's one. Here's another one. Stephen King Rare Editions, first signed limited lettered proofs. The parameters on this group are pretty much the same as the other group. This group is very much focused on showing, buying, selling books. The other group is more, it's that, but it's also about education and information for collectors. This group, you can ask questions, but it's more really about rare, buying and selling rare books. It is very useful if you're buying or selling. It can be a lot of fun just to sort of watch and see some of the things that come up. Some of the collections are just world-class collections on this group, and it can be fun just to see these things that you've maybe only heard of or didn't even know existed. So as far as gathering information, StephenKingCollector.com is a great resource. The site can be a little bit challenging to navigate. It's a little bit old school. Sometimes there are sales and auctions and random stuff that pop up. That's interesting. But what I use a lot are these tabs here. So it's not UK, it's US first editions only, but then there's a tab for US limiteds and UK limiteds. So you click into first editions, and they're not arranged chronologically. They are arranged alphabetically, which is fine. But say you are interested in information about The Shining. So here's a picture of the first edition cover, so you know what to look for. If the print run is available, it's shared. So 25,000 copies of the first edition, when it was released, and information to look for in terms of how to identify a first edition. The one thing about the collector that is well known in the collecting community is that they provide estimates of current value, and they are almost always out of date, sometimes woefully out of date. A first edition of The Shining is now worth quite a bit more than $400 to $600. So take that with a grain of salt. You look at this and you think, oh, wow, that would be a great price. Yeah, it would be. And it was a fair price a few years ago. But you can look at US limiteds, if there have been limiteds. There's information about limitations, publisher, how to identify, a little bit more content here. I mean, these are very, very valuable resources. UK Limiteds, the Shining Folio Society, information there. There are resources over here where you can look at remarks. The collector also does slipcases. Probably the most commonly seen are the slipcases for the Dark Tower series. I see a lot of pictures of people's collections, and I have a few of these too, where the books are protected in these handsome and heavyweight slipcases. They're very sturdy. They're very nice. I also have this one for later, and it's really attractive. Forums are handy. I mean, this is just where people can post things for sale. They can ask questions. Again, the Facebook groups, I think, are a better organized way to get the same information. The forums on the collector are pretty unwieldy. There are links on the collector. So there are things out there that I'm not familiar with, that I don't regularly use, but I have checked out thedarktower.org, and it is kind of similar to the collector. It's arranged. There's chat lists, and there's galleries, and there's wikis and forums and stuff. It's a lot of valuable information, a lot of fascinating stuff here, but it can be a little bit tricky to navigate. You can go over to Stephen King's own website, stephenking.com, and I found this handy dandy list, which is kind of what the information I try to share in my How to Identify First Edition videos, except it's just written down. So people, I mean, you might look at this and it's pretty self-explanatory what this means, but it can also be confusing if you're not familiar with all the jargon and what to look for. So, but anyway, it's a very valuable resource. It is updated. It's a little bit out of date. The last one on here is Billy Summers, but it is pretty useful. And then finally, when it comes to building your collection, that implies that you are interested in purchasing books. And you can go on the Facebook groups and do in search of posts, and there are plenty of members. The first one I showed has over 2,000. The second one has over 5,000 members. So someone's going to have something that you're interested in and probably be willing to sell it to you at a fair price. But a few other websites that I like to browse and use are Biblio.com, abebooks.com, and a lot of times the sellers on Biblio and Abe are the same, so you might do browses on either site and see very familiar stuff. It's because the sellers have accounts on both. And then, of course, the much maligned eBay. I've heard it referred to as FeeBay, but it is a really useful place to search and look for things. You have to be really careful with Stephen King collectible books on eBay, that you know what you're actually getting, because sometimes I think sellers are nefarious and trying to take advantage of people and purposefully misrepresenting what they have to take advantage of someone who doesn't know any better. But a lot of times I think the seller doesn't quite know what they have either, and they're listing it in good faith, but it is misrepresented. So you have to be careful. So you refer back to the How to Identify videos that I've done, refer back to the How to Identify list from Stephen King's website. There are similar resources on both of those Facebook groups that I showed, and know exactly what to look for before you make an eBay purchase. And if you think it's there, but the seller hasn't shown all the right the right points to look for, ask for additional pictures. And if they say, no, I don't want to show you any more pictures, do not buy that item. As an informed seller will know the things that an informed buyer is looking for and make sure to show pictures of all of those things. So if I were selling a copy of it, I would show the price, I would show the end papers, I would show the copyright page, just the things that go into identifying a first edition. If they're selling a first edition, they want to show it as such. But if you are unsure, then tread with caution, seek additional information, and don't be afraid to walk away if the person is not being communicative, if they don't want to show you the things that you need to see. Do not be afraid to walk away. But eBay, it's worth checking out. I made that sound really intense, but it is worth checking out because every once in a while, I mean, there's some comically bad deals on eBay, but there's also periodically some really good deals. So it is definitely worth checking out. And you can create saved searches. So for instance, there's a few things that I am always on the lookout for, like a first UK edition of Dead Zone, for instance. So I have a couple of saved searches, and every time something is listed that is in the ballpark of my saved searches, it will let me know, hey, new item listed that matches this. I can jump on, I can check it out. That is incredibly useful. And that is something that is, I think, pretty specific to eBay. So I've talked about Facebook groups, references, resources, and places to purchase materials. I am going to stop sharing my screen and I'll be right back with you. Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna reload some pages and I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna show you some publishers that you should follow so that you're in the loop and know what they've got planned and what's coming. Okay. So start at the left. So there's a couple of publishers that I think are sort of the go-to for regular Stephen King related publications. So they've done several in the past, and we know that they have ones in the pipeline that are forthcoming. And in the US, that publisher is Cemetery Dance, cemeterydance.com. And they have news, production updates. Okay, so Cemetery Dance, they are in the midst of their Doubleday Years series, which started with Carrie, and they're about to do The Stand, and then Pet Cemetery will be the last one in that series. But they've done several other Stephen King related projects. They also do slipcases for trade edition Stephen King books. So if you scroll down to the bottom of cemeterydance.com, you can subscribe to the newsletters. So if you do that, then you'll get a ton of stuff. Cemetery Dance is notorious for selling things and advertising things. The founder of the company, Richard Chismar, is a celebrated author in his own right. And so sometimes they use their emails to promote Chismar's stuff, but they also give regular updates about their projects, Stephen King projects included. So that's very valuable. So Cemetery Dance in the US, PS Publishing in the UK. They have also done multiple Stephen King. They average about one per year, and they have future projects in the pipeline. They're about to do different seasons, of course, and then Firestarter and 11/22/63, I believe, are known, and I have no idea if they anticipate going beyond that, but they've been doing about one a year for, I don't know, the past 10 years or so, and their books are interesting and eclectic. But anyway, definitely worth following. You can, I think you click the newsletter here and you can subscribe. Yep. want to know what's going on, sign up to our weekly newsletter. Just click this link here and sign up. Their newsletter comes out every Friday morning, which I like. Once a week. It's predictable. You know what to expect. So we get into some publishers that have done high-profile Stephen King releases in the past, but there's no concrete indication that they will ever do one again. Suntup is a very, very high-quality publisher of just beautiful editions, and they started like with a bang. They made a splash in a big way with their first major release was Misery, which we have covered in other videos on the channel. But Stephen King, I think he's always supported and kind of had a soft spot for small press publishers. And when Suntup made their pitch for a signed limited edition, Stephen King said, "Yep, let's do it." So they did it, got Suntup off on the right foot. They are creating some amazing works of art in forms of books. So it is worth checking to, keep an eye in case they ever do a Stephen King release again. But there's no guarantee that that will ever happen. But up here in the corner, sign up for our newsletter. It's worth checking out. If you like Stephen King, you probably like some other authors as well. And like, for instance, their newest release is Legion by William Peter Blatty, who was a peer of Stephen King. So there's a lot of good stuff, coming from Suntup. So Subterranean is a US based publisher, and they've done some limiteds. I think The Shining, well, at least The Shining, they did a special limited edition of The Shining, which included a signed state as well. They've done far more in regards to Joe Hill Publishing, who is Stephen King's son. They are a publisher to look out for, to watch. Sign up for our news and offers. There you go. It's right there on the site. So sign up. As far as Joe Hill is concerned, they have some kind of limited release of Joe Hill's novella Late Returns coming at some point. That's all I know is in the pipeline from them. Folio Society, legendary UK-based publisher, and a few years ago they did a limited of The Shining, and then just recently, or in the last year or so, they did a limited of Misery that has a gift edition, unsigned, and also a signed limited edition, which kind of made a splash. But I don't know what it is about UK publishers, but they kind of take an understated route to creating these books sometimes. And the signed limiteds from Folio, The Shining and Misery, I believe were both books with, as Noah would call them, post-it notes stuck in, where Stephen King signed his name on a bunch of adhesive pieces of paper, and then they just peeled and stuck. And that's how they released their books. It's also worth noting that the Folio Society, so most publishers, if they say it's 1,000 copies, when those 1,000 copies are sold out, which might be in a matter of days, hours, whatever, then it's done. It'll never exist again. Folio Society goes back to the well, and they can do second printings, third printings, whatever. So it's worth paying attention to that. On their website, I don't believe they indicate that, hey, you're about to get a second printing of this book, but you could always reach out and ask them ahead of time. So news and blog. So I'm in the US. I better select that. News and blog. That is worth. Yep. Sign up for the newsletter right down here, enter your email address and submit. It's just another avenue. They have done some Stephen King stuff. They may very well do more in the future, so it's worth keeping an eye on. And the rather old school Donald Grant website is kind of fun. It's kind of interesting, but it is, the web address is secure.grantbooks.com. And you can, right at the top of the page, you can sign up for their newsletter. They don't do a lot, as opposed to like Suntup that does a book every month, at least one book a month. Grant, I mean, they're not coming out with a bunch of new stuff, but they are the company that has done Christine, the signed limited edition of Christine. They did a signed limited of Desperation. They've done the entire Dark Tower series. So they are very important publishers in the Stephen King universe. They even have a tab here for Stephen King. The Wind Through the Keyhole, the artist edition, believe it or not, is still available. To go to Grant Books right now and buy this book. It's a great place to start your collection. I think it's $85 or something like that. But this is a list of all the things that they've done with Stephen King. Oh yeah, Talisman as well, and Black House. But you can, let's see, portfolios, the Wastelands portfolio, this trade thing is available, still available, $25. Pick it up. So you buy Wind Through the Keyhole, the book, great way to start your special edition book collection. If you're interested in the art, this trade portfolio for $25 is a great way to start your Stephen King related art collection. They do, you can get dust jackets, which is really interesting. So Stephen King related dust jackets. So if you get a book that has sort of a worn and tattered jacket, you can come to the Donald Grant site and they might have new old stock and you can buy a new jacket. Pretty cool.
Okay, so then we come to Centipede Press. Now, Centipede Press has done just a massive legendary signed limited of Salem's Lot in the past, and they just recently did The Long Walk. So they've not done a ton of Stephen King, and there's no indication that they are currently in the process of preparing future titles, but they are one to keep an eye on. Now, Centipede is a bit quirkier and more niche, even in a niche market. Centipede is pretty niche and be a little interesting to purchase from. And there's no place on the website where you can just go ahead and like enter your email address and sign up for the newsletter. But if you email Jared at centipedepress.com, Jerad at centipedepress.com, and ask, can I be added to the mailing list? You'll get added to the mailing list. Centipede releases their weekly newsletter every Sunday morning. And I'm in Central Time, so that's 10:30 Central Time. And that's when they announce upcoming books. That's when new books go up for sale. They never spring it on you. They always give you a week notice at least, which I think is really nice. And they never put a book up for sale until it is just almost ready to be received, to get packed, and to ship out. Also very, very nice. Definitely something appreciated, especially when companies like Cemetery Dance are notorious for taking years after they take your money to actually send you a book. Centipede has a really quick turnaround, which I appreciate. And so you may notice I'm wearing a different shirt all of a sudden, and I've got glasses on and my headset. Same video, different day. And since I started preparing this video just a few days ago, something new came up on my radar. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, this is not intended to be a definitive, one-stop shop, end all, be all. I know I will have left some stuff out. I know there are things that I will have forgotten, but these are the things that spring to mind when I think of beginning collectors. These are the things that I know right now. And so I had heard about this publisher Conversation Tree Press, and they were just getting started, and they released an edition of Peter Pan, which $275 up to $2,700. You'll notice that's the one that sold out, that cost $2,700. Pretty amazing. Doesn't hold any interest for me at all. But at the bottom of their page, sign up for the newsletter. I thought, why not? And lo and behold, all of the sudden, the other day, gosh, just yesterday, they announced that they are producing a signed limited edition of a Joe Hill title, which definitely is on my radar and does interest me very much. So I went ahead and added Conversation Tree Press to this video. It's worth checking out. They've done, this is a Joe Hill title. They may do future ones. They had not broadcast or forecast that they were doing this. They may have, other people may have known. I did not know. So it comes as a surprise to me. So Fawn is a novella that was featured in a previous Joe Hill collection. Joe Hill is an author with so many limited edition releases of his works. Most of the books have at least one limited edition, if not more. He doesn't have that many books in his bibliography, but he's got a lot of limited editions. But anyway, this is a limited edition of a novella from one of his books and illustrated by Francois Vaillancourt. He is a wonderful Canadian illustrator, and he's been featured in numerous publications from different presses over the last several years. Probably his big break was being featured in the Levidian release of Stephen King's Revival a few years back. That's where I first became familiar with him, but he's all over the place now, and that's a wonderful thing because he's a great illustrator. But anyway, printed in letterpress, edition information. Every one will be signed by Joe Hill. So standard, deluxe, lettered, even a Roman numeral edition. I have no idea how much these will cost when the time comes. I'm hoping that because it's a novella, it will be a more slim volume, and hopefully the standard will cost less than the standard of Peter Pan at $275, but we shall see. So anyway, all this information is here, and like it says, kind of the point of this whole portion of the video, the best way to stay updated is to subscribe to the newsletter at the bottom of the page. There's a lot of publishers out there. Stephen King in particular is sort of known for lending his name and his work to a fledgling small press to help get them off the ground, which I think he did for Levidian, which was called Letterpress at the time, and which he's done for Cemetery Dance. They've published some stuff. Suntup, especially, Suntup hit it with a bang with their Stephen King, their edition of Misery by Stephen King. So anyway, there are other publishers out there. You can probably Google to find more and subscribe to all of them. Subscribe to all the newsletters, because it's always better to be aware of these things that are coming than to miss out. But if you don't find the newsletter, you don't subscribe, if you keep following those two Facebook groups that I showed you, then those groups, something will pop up. Somebody will share something. Hey, this is coming. Are you aware? And so I always figure, put all the tools in your toolbox, subscribe to all the newsletters, follow groups, do your save searches on eBay, all the stuff like that, and you will be aware as much as possible of when new things come up and are available. So that's a pretty valuable thing, and that's my best advice, is just subscribe to all the things, get all the information so you can make the best, timeliest choices possible. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing, stop this portion of the video. I will see you in a minute. Thank you very much for joining me on this journey. This has been my longest video ever, which is saying something because I can talk and talk. I have some long videos, but it was a great question, thought-provoking question. I've been working on this video for several days, trying to get it all together and get it out there. I hope you found it helpful. Like I said in the beginning, I know that this isn't comprehensive. I'm not claiming that it is comprehensive. Everybody's got their own perspective and advice. If you have some perspective and advice to share for new collectors, please leave it in the comments. Let's turn this video into sort of a community resource of shared knowledge for everyone's benefit. That would be great. But anyway, thank you to the YouTuber T-Town Trekker 5174 for the original question. And I dedicate this video to you. I dedicate this video to everyone who is just starting out on their Stephen King collecting journey. And until next time, take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you later. Bye.